Tonight's first encounter. I have a job as a social worker for a private company in central Missouri. At the time, I worked in and around a small rural community called Windsor in Henry County. My job took me all over the eastern part of Henry County, often in rural areas down dirt roads through thick forests. I don't recall the exact day or even month, but sometime in the spring of 2018, I was driving on a rural road south of Windsor. Specifically, I was driving south on Evans Road. In Windsor, this is County Line Road because it is the county line between Henry and Pettis County. Just south of the eastward turn to Brandon Road, Evans Road makes an L shape. That turns the road from north to south to east to west. When heading south, to your left is an open field so you can see if there's anything around the bend on the east to west turn. Seeing there wasn't, I took the turn and glanced at something on my phone. When I looked up and saw a boy in the middle of the road, I wasn't going very fast, but if I hadn't turned fast, I would have hit him. I remained stationary in the road, and I sailed past him as I lied on the brakes and skipped to a stop. I saw him out of the side of my eyes as I passed him very close. Despite this, he did not seem in any way troubled by almost getting hit by my SUV. It was only when I passed very close that I got a glimpse of his eyes, black. At the time, I thought nothing of it and assumed it was a trick of the light or part of the stress, or maybe he was even wearing sunglasses. Whatever the case, I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was just worried I almost hit a kid. Once my vehicle was stopped, I opened the door and jumped out to see nothing there. No one, no boy, no sign of a boy. Yeah, I could feel him. I felt like I was being watched, and got the sense that he was on the other side of my vehicle. I started to walk around it thinking he was hiding from me because he was scared, understandably so. I called out to him, then dropped to my knees to look under the SUV to see if I could find his feet and know how far from me he was on the other side of the vehicle. I saw nothing. I backed away from the parked SUV far enough that I would see if anything emerged on the other side and waited. Nothing. Yet the whole time I had a feeling of being watched. It's hard to explain, but I felt like the dread you get when a teacher scolds you for doing something, then watches you for a while afterward. Like, you know, if you make another mistake, you're going to get scolded again. After a while, waiting around just felt stupid, so I got in my vehicle and left. Still in a daze from what had happened, I messaged my wife and a couple of my friends about it. But there was nothing else to do. I spoke to some locals about local ghost legends, but there was nothing about a boy haunting that road. There is an old cemetery not far from there, and Windsor is a very old community. So there is a high likelihood of some hauntings, but nothing about the road being haunted by a ghost boy. The feeling of being watched persisted no matter where I went for the next few hours, but the most intense when I was in my vehicle. It's worth noting that when I got out of my SUV, I left my door open. And when I was circling the vehicle at one point, the door was on the other side, so he could have jumped in there before I looked under for his feet. It did not occur to me at the time to search the inside of the vehicle. In a way, I'm glad I didn't. I left it alone after that, and it only ever came up again when friends wanted me to relay the creepy story to others. Coincidentally, my voice tutor is a member of the local ghost hunting group, and I talked with him about it. He asked if the boy frightened me. I said yes, but not because I thought he wanted to hurt me. More like the same kind of dread you get from being stared at by a stranger. You just don't know what they want. It might be harmless, but it might not be. A few months pass and nothing. Over the summer, I start walking at night to exercise. I often did this at night, as my day job keeps me at work for long hours, and evenings are the only time I have to do so. So I usually walk around 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. I mentioned before I like to listen to horror documentaries about the paranormal and unsolved mysteries. I usually load these up on my iPhone and listen as I walk. I live in a small town called Cole Camp, just south of Saladia, Missouri. It, too, is a very old town with a fair share of ghost stories. It was even the site of a Civil War battle. I noticed sometimes while walking, I'd get the feeling again like I was being watched. I would look around expecting to see someone looking at me, but there was nothing as usual. Cole Camp is a small town, and it's rare to cross paths with someone else that time of night. However, from time to time, I would catch a glimpse of an outline of a boy, often in the shadows of someone's yard or in an alley, only to have it vanish when I look back a second time. This has happened at least a dozen times or so, and it happened again as recently as last week, which brings me to the last encounter, which is by far the strangest after the initial. While I was walking, I started listening to YouTube video about BECs, or black-eyed children. It was a compilation of spooky stories about them. While listening, my iPhone started to act funny. It randomly skipped to a next video, forcing me to jump back and find the place in the first one. My iPhone never does this. Cole Camp is literally in the middle of nowhere, so 4G is spotty at best. However, when it gives out, it usually just buffers or freezes. I've never had it just skip an entire video. I eventually assumed there was something wrong with that video and went to the other one. It wasn't what I wanted anyway. I wanted theory about these BECs. I had already started suspecting that's what I was dealing with, and I really needed some data. I found a discussion video about them and started listening to what they were saying as I walked. It continually did the same thing, jump around like the first video. That was when I felt it again. Him. I felt I was being watched. I turned and looked up the street, where I sensed he was standing but saw nothing. I turned back around, and as my head passed over a row of houses, I caught a silhouette of him in the alley between two houses, near a tree. I didn't realize I had seen him at first, but when I did, I looked back and he was gone. I promptly returned home, but I have to stipulate that it wasn't because I was scared. I just felt compelled to return home. I don't think he means me harm, and if he did, he'd have plenty of chances already. But I just felt like I needed to be home. I played a random video as I walked home and experienced no more jumps. Once I was home, I locked the door and switched to YouTube on my TV. My wife was at choir practice, so I was home alone with our 4 cats. Once inside, I didn't feel him anymore. I started the video again, and it was playing fine for a while, until it froze. As soon as that happened, I noticed my cat pointing her nose at the front door, growling slowly. Aurea is our most aggressive to territorial cat, also the smallest, so it's kinda cute. And she's the most likely to confront an intruder, but she never hisses at a closed door, even where there's a neighborhood cat on the other side. If the big door is open and she can see out the screen door, she just stares down the other cats to let them know that this is her place. She never growls unless another cat is inside or near her, like if we open the door or there isn't a barrier. What I'm saying is that this was an unusual behavior for her, but not out of character. If Arya sensed a threat on the porch that a door might not stop, she would behave in exactly this manner. Meanwhile, I had an overwhelming sense that I should not go to the door or look outside. Not dread, just knowing I shouldn't. The YouTube video would not play at all. I remember my front door security camera, which feeds to an app on my phone, and activated it. All I saw was a black screen. I assumed my app was down and restarted it, but nothing. I called my wife and asked her to check hers. She did, and hers was black as well. Then, while I was on the phone with her, she said, "Oh, it's back." I grabbed my phone and looked, and sure enough, I could see the porch. Arya ceased hissing and walked off to do her cat business. I no longer felt the need to avoid that door, and when I looked for myself, I saw everything was clear. Aside from this, the only other strangeness has been that I cannot add videos about black eyed children to my watch later list on YouTube. I can put them there, and they are there if I look immediately, but if I wait any length of time, they are deleted. It's been almost a week and I haven't been walking. I've actually been very sick this weekend, but I'm feeling better, so I haven't encountered him again. I no longer fear him, if I ever did. I don't think he wants to hurt me, as he could have already if he had wished to. He's never knocked on my door or attempted contact, but I've never spoken to him either. Whenever I feel him, I will try to say something. I don't get the feeling of maliciousness from him, only curiosity. My wife, incidentally, calls herself a cautious believer in these things, but she doesn't believe in black-eyed children specifically. She believes my initial counter was legitimate ghost sighting, but everything that has followed has been a product of my own overworked and highly creative mind, which is fair. I also know what this encounter is atypical of black-eyed children, in that they tend to be malicious or sadistic, and they are not shy about approaching people. Perhaps this one was touched that I got out of my vehicle to check on him after I almost hit him instead of driving away. There is no need to warn me of the risks. I already know not to let him into my home. If he comes to my door, I'll talk to him through it. He's never tried this, though. I'm at a loss for understanding this. This is not my first paranormal experience, but it is by far the most intriguing. My first paranormal experiences do not seem connected. Tonight's second encounter. My house has always been creepy. Growing up, I've had unexplained experiences starting from the time that I was 4 and not stopping. I live in rural Kentucky, one of those towns that solely relies on coal and is 5 years behind the rest of the world. In general, the whole town is still covered in thick woods that appear to have not been tampered with in hundreds of years. My house is placed right in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by an extreme amount of woods and even a couple of ponds. That gives you the setting for my home. This is where the experience begins. Growing up, I was never allowed to watch shows such as Ghost Hunters or even movies such as The Exorcist in the house because of the weird activity in which goes on here. I'd experienced it from an extremely young age, and my mom, who has lived in this house her entire life, had also. However, one night my family made the exception and we all watched a documentary about Waverly Hills together. At that age, I still slept in a room with my mom due to me being afraid of sleeping in the house. That night I woke up at 3 in the morning to a feeling of something watching me. It felt extremely uneasy. I rolled over to look around the room and my eyes locked onto something standing beside my mom. It was extremely tall, but looked as if it had a broken back and could not stand up completely. It was hunched over and extremely paled skin. Bones were sticking out under its skin everywhere due to how skinny it was. It had long claws hanging from both hands, its face was sunken in, and its eyes were completely black. A few greasy hairs were visible on its head. It had no clothes, but also no genitals or nipples. I was horrified. I rolled over and covered myself from head to toe with my covers. I refused to move or even look out the rest of the night, even though I was fully awake. Eventually, my mom finally wakes up in the morning. She immediately starts complaining of her side hurting. She had raised her shirt to look and found huge claw marks down her side. It was 3 deep wounds, which were extremely inflamed and still bleeding. I felt horrible knowing what I knew, and all I did was lie there hidden. A couple of months later, I saw the creature again. Although not as horrible as the first experience, I was woken up to the creature slouching on the floor on my side of my bed. It was watching me. As I slept, I covered myself up again immediately, but this time got the courage to peek out and found it still staring at me. I'm not sure when it went away because I did not dare look again. The feeling of the creature gave the room was horrifying. I got the chills, all my hair stood on end before even seeing it. It had the feeling of complete evil to it. I'm 18 now and obviously sleep in my own room now. However, I still live in the same house. My mom still sleeps in that room where I witnessed the creature. Almost nightly, she has nightmares about something watching her in her room. She has nightmares about something hiding in the paintings on her walls and something coming from the ceiling of her room while she sleeps. There's one specific corner of that room where almost every dream seems to originate in. Our cat refuses to stay in that room if the door is shut. I have had countless other experiences in this house, but these are the major ones. Tonight's third encounter. This happened to me 8 years ago, but surely something I'll always remember. My grandfather made it clear that I should never talk about what we've experienced, and I should just forget it ever happened. But I feel like I won't ever let go of this memory if I wouldn't be able to release it. So, anyway, I was 11 at the time. It was summer, and usually we visited our vacation home, which is pretty secluded. We don't have any close neighbors, and the house is literally in the middle of the woods. I never disliked going there, as it's close to the river with a waterfall, which, by the way, looks straight up from the Garden of Eve. My parents let me stay in the house with my grandfather as my mom and dad would have a business trip. But I remember them promising they'll follow as soon as they get back from their trip. My granddad picked me up at around 2 p.m. in the afternoon and we drove 3 hours. Evening arrived and we are halfway through because of a major car crash. We're stuck in traffic for a while. We almost finished 10 radio dramas while waiting through traffic. We were finally driving up the mountain, which means we're pretty close. But the road is insanely dark and covered in trees. There are some parts of the road where it looked like you were driving through tunnels, as the tree branches were covering the sky. Then a loud thud broke the silence between the two of us. My granddad had hit a big rock that was sitting in the middle of the road, like someone intentionally put it there to cause an inconvenience. This caused the car to smoke, and it turns out the clutch had overheated. My granddad decided to spend the night in the car, as he was very tired, and he's not very good at driving in the dark. I was already tired, so I was ready to fall asleep. My granddad said he'd get his pillow and flashlight from the compartment of the car. I was listening to him move and arrange our stuff, and then I fell asleep. I'm not sure how long I had been sleeping, but I woke up to the sound of scratching underneath the car, like someone had a rock and was writing something under the car. I was 100% sure I was going to forget it and just sleep. But as I wandered with my eyes, I saw a small dash of light in the dark road. It was my granddad facing the tree, pointing his flashlight in the total black nothingness. I thought he also heard that scratching sound and was looking for it. I was about to get out of the car and call him to say, hey, get back in the car because I'm scared, but suddenly I noticed that his neck was unusually long and had a patch of hair running through his whole neck. I knew something messed up was going on, so I started watching and looking around the car. I panicked, and there I saw my grandfather, covered in blankets, sleeping in the back of the car. I quickly woke him up and told him what I had seen. He quickly dismissed it, saying that maybe I was dreaming or I was just tired. But I knew he was also scared from what I told him, and he tried to stay calm so I wouldn't panic. Just a few minutes later, the scratches were back and they were getting louder, and there was also thudding under the car like someone was smashing their hands under the car. I was panicking. My eyes were filled with tears. My vision was all blurry and my head was hurting from anxiety. My grandfather heard all of this. This time he was awake and more alert. He said there's probably squirrels or rabbits under the car and he'll go check, which I quickly opposed, as I've seen this stuff on horror movies and it never goes well. And I was also scared to be left alone in the car just for a second. As soon as he opened the door, the flashlight, where whatever that thing I saw in the woods lit, I was so scared. It was lying on the ground. It was facing our car, and then I heard the scariest sound I had ever heard in my life, my mom's voice. But we both knew that whatever that thing was not my mom. The voice sounded disgusting and distorted. It was stringy and sounded like it was pretending to try to imitate human sounds. The voice lasted for a minute or more. Parts sounded so terrifying. It sounded like it was shrieking in pain, but almost laughing at the same time. My grandfather closed the door and locked it and sat in the driver's seat, shaking. We shared eye contact. He was so pale and looked terrified. We were both sitting in pure fear, and radio was silent because the signal was not that good in this area. That night, we drove back home. My grandfather always told me to forget everything that happened that night and to make sure that I do pray every night. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed tonight's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. With that, I want to thank you all for your support, and may the Great Spirit watch over us all. And may He guide us down that path that we call life.